Once again, thank you so much for being a part of our first podcast. Cypher Tech Advisory Board members, I really appreciate your time in doing this podcast with us today. What I'd like to start off with is a brief introduction of the advisors. Each advisor will have an opportunity to highlight their background and expertise and your connection to SafeSpace. So let's start off with you, Anastasia.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Anastasia Towton. I am a HR professional who spent about the last 20 years in all facets of HR, right? When you think about the candidate experience all the way to the employee experience and how organizations can really foster a culture of belonging, right? And I think SafeSpace provides just a really unique way and robust platform for organizations to really look at the insights that they gather, right? And really use that to create the right strategies and interventions for their organization. So it gives them a customizable way to really make change within their organizations. And as we talk about, partnering and thinking about future of work, I think there are greater conversations that SafeSpace can have with organizations to really foster enablement and resources and how to do those things in a meaningful way.
That sounds fantastic. Everything you've said has resonated for me. So thank you so much. I'm going to move alphabetically to Denise. Hi, Denise.
Hi, good to see you. Honored to be here. My name is Denise Conroy. I am an executive coach these days, but before becoming an executive coach, I had a 30-year career in corporate America. I was a chief marketing officer at HGTV, and then I was a CEO for private equity-backed portfolio companies for about a decade. And one of the things that a lot of folks don't realize, cohesion, great culture, it actually feels magical when you are in an organization that has it. What's interesting, though, is it's not really magic. It's about accountability. It's about metrics. It's about process, all the stuff that people think is very boring and folks want to gloss over. What I really, really like about SafeSpace is how it's a technology-enabled platform that provides that accountability, the metrics, the really information for leadership to make decisions, pivot, change, get better, iterate. So that really resonated with me as someone who's run a couple companies.
Thank you so much. That's a great perspective for someone who's been in the C-suite, who has always been a supporter and also HR adjacent. So thank you so much for those insights. EE, nice to see you.
You too. Glad to be here. EE Samai. I started working with youth, when I was a youth myself, at 18. And I worked with youth for a few decades. And about 15 years ago, I started doing peer mediation and restorative justice work. And I transitioned from working with youth to doing organizational effectiveness and culture and leadership development work. And something I always noticed was how underreported issues were. The leaders I coached would say, well, why didn't they tell me sooner that there were issues? HR professionals would say, well, we have a lot of data and exit interviews, but that's a little late to do anything about that employee's experience. And sometimes when you are far away from the issues, because they're underreported, it could appear like everything is okay until it's not. And so when I met Danish and I learned about what he was trying to do was to create this pathway for people to be able to say early, when things could still be handled, that things were happening and that things needed attention. It just immediately resonated with me. I knew exactly that this was the kind of organization I wanted to support.
That's great insight as well. Thank you so much, EE. I think the message that I'm getting from all three introductions is that you're very in tune with fostering safe environments wherever you are. There are misconceptions about what an inclusive workplace looks like. And, you know, perhaps you can share with us some key trends that you've been seeing in your work as professionals in workplace culture and how we can make it better.
Yeah, I'm happy to go. I think for me, the conversations that I've been having with practitioners these days, I serve as DEI, be practitioner to organizations, right? So we're always thinking about how do we create the right inclusive culture for organizations based on where they are on a maturity model, right? And how do we create the right enablement with that? Um, and as we think about the future of work, again, it's something that continues to come up. I think that there's an opportunity for more collaboration, more enablement. Again, you'll continue to hear me say enablement, but I think that's one of the things that conversations that are coming up more and more on my end, right? Future of work, future of work. And I think again, I continue to talk about that greater opportunity, but there needs to be more of a cohesiveness, and the platform provides more of that.
And I would add, one of the things I see in my executive coaching practice is mobbing and harassment. So over 60% of the women that I coach are executives, and they are women in the global majority. And what I'm seeing is not only women in the global majority or people in that group, but I'm also seeing folks in the LGBTQ community, folks in the disabled community being othered, being harassed. That's not new, right? We have a term for it now, mobbing, though, because what tends to happen is like high school, right? People will gang up on a person that they perceive as different, therefore weak. They will harass them. And really, they either want them to be silent, they want them to get fired, or they want them to just get fed up and quit. This actually happened to me, believe it or not, at HGTV. So I'm pretty familiar with all the tips and tricks, but I will tell you, I'm a white woman, so I have a lot of privilege. It's infinitely worse. And I see it with my clients who are not white. So I would just say that something like SafeSpace is, I think, a force for good in really trying to kind of scour the workplace of all of the different variables that are there and set for mobbing.
I love that verb scour,
Yeah.
because sometimes that is what you have to do. And it is, just like with personal hygiene, right? It has to be a habit. It can't just be like, we did this effort 3 years ago and we should be good for now. One of the trends I see is this focus on diversity and the numbers and what a company can report, without a focus on a culture of inclusion. And so you get people who are, of different lived experiences, identities, and we call it an add and stir, right? It's like, let's just see it. We don't actually have to do any real work to think about, well, will they feel a sense of belonging here? And what are the ways that by default we are exclusive, because of the way that the founders set up the culture, and so on. And so, people have this misconception that that once we have the diverse numbers, we're good, right? We did our job. But then you see that it's not enough because people leave. The turnover, has a high cost to organizations because you have the big gaps, in the positions, interviewing, attracting good talent, and once you have a certain reputation on places like Glassdoor that you don't have an inclusive culture, then it's infinitely harder to attract good talent. And so I'm always telling the leaders I work with, before you hire that first like Black woman to join your board, or whatever, fill in the blank, like really consider, are you ready for that person to contribute at the highest level? Are you ready for a different perspective, right? Are you ready for certain ways that you've been doing things to be questioned?
I'd love to add to that too, EE, because I think it's also about how you onboard that person. You,
Yes.
you don't use it's not, to your point, it's not like drop them in there and stir it, right? You have to be willing to clear that path. You have to be willing to say intentionally, here's how I'm going to onboard, here's what I'm looking out for. Because let's face it, like when we talk about mobbing, all manner of shenanigans are going to start happening in the first 90 days, hell, maybe probably, even very much sooner than that. But I just think that if there has to be intentionality about how you bring folks into an organization. And honestly, are you an advocate? Are you a champion for them? Do you look out for them? I don't mean that from a white saviorist perspective. I just mean it from a leadership perspective, right? Because to be fair, I mean, mobbing is something that happens, harassment to a lot of folks, right? It's not exclusively one group or one type of person. So I think it's that intentionality and onboarding that really helps.
I do too, and I'll just add really quickly as well. As we think about that, again, I think about the resourcing and the enablement for the organization to support individuals transition into these organizations, right? Again, it goes back to what does your infrastructure look like around DEIB, right? Do you have ERGs or employee communities in place or communities of practice, right, that you can introduce folks to? So I love the piece around onboarding. What does that onboarding plan look like? Where's the intentionality in it, and how do you create the right success matrix to make sure it's the right thing in the right moment for the organization? Another piece I add really quickly as well that I was trying to touch on, but it was more around hybrid work. I'm hearing a lot around that and remote work, right? So as we think about different family structures and needs around needing to work remotely, there's more conversations that I'm hearing around family structure. I'm hearing around caregiving. I'm hearing a lot of things, right? And I think there's a lot of individuals and organizations who want to have the broader conversation around this because they're feeling excluded, right? And there's so many other dimensions of diversity that they may have to layer on, right, to really understand how do I get the right support I need. But organizations need to be enabled to know that hybrid work and remote work and what that looks like. And those conversations are really happening. I'm hearing that a lot.
Mm-hmm. This is just also juicy and stuff that I love because it's stuff that I would love to talk about all day. For me, always goes back to revenue. If you want a productive workforce and you want to make sure that you succeed in the revenue that you have, your KPI, then that all goes back to psychological safety and what the culture looks like and how the team dynamic is. And, even small stuff that's really big stuff to us, standard operating procedures. One person doesn't get something up on another person because they're well liked. I've had those experiences where I've had to deal with a manager being a great individual contributor, but not a great people leader. And they're not knowing the difference. And so for me, SafeSpace is all encompassing. It's everything in my 24-year career that I've been wanting to do, but I've been subscribing to different companies to get something that SafeSpace has. One of my favorite features is actually being able to collect the data without forcing employees to do an engagement survey. All of you have sat in spaces where, okay, it's the fourth quarter, it's time to do a year-end engagement survey, or it's performance review time. We need to make sure that what we've promised we would be doing in January with our KPIs, we've checked all of the boxes every quarter. I'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts around the feature that you like most in SafeSpace?
I'll go. I love the insight piece. I think for me, I'm looking at it from the lens of being so close and really understanding and learning more about the product and platform itself, from just the user experience versus the customer experience. And I think there's a piece around the data that's so important for me. I will say, in this space, you hear a lot about survey fatigue, and people are tired of doing surveys, and we continue to do surveys, but what's happening with those surveys? And I think SafeSpace provides the right insights and the right moment for organizations to make it digestible. So I love that piece because it helps really tell a cohesive story as the organization thinks about progression in their efforts.
I love that link to counseling and that link to coaching. I mean, as an executive coach, I love that it takes it a step further, which a lot of these tools tend to be very diagnostic, and then they don't get into the action part, the actual the hard work, the heavy lifting of employee development. So I love that.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the word you used earlier, Denise, accountability. There's something that happens in a lot of companies where, an employee files a complaint and it feels like it just goes into the void, and you don't know what's happening. You don't know what support you can get, and that feature just to say like, all right, now this is where you are. Now a case manager has seen it, and now this is what's happening, and this is what you might expect. Because there's so much anxiety in the wait. Right? And so for a person to just know what to expect, that can calm a lot of nerves. So I really love that feature. I also love that there is a way to even learn, right? Like, I know we're talking about using AI and certain tools to just even figure out like, how do I even navigate what the policy is and what the steps are and the procedures? Because if someone has never done this before, it is very intimidating. There's a lot of legalese in there, and am I doing the right thing? And so that kind of having a guide, like a step by step. This is how you do it. This is what's going to happen. These are some of the best practices I use when I do conflict engagement work. People are so nervous. There's so much anxiety. It's like the more information you can surround the person with, the more answers you can provide them with every step along the way, the more they feel confident in the process.
Absolutely amazing. So I wanted to know, how do you think SafeSpace could help companies navigate their challenges of hybrid and remote work? There's been several articles over the last 6 months about companies wanting their staff to come back into the office. I personally believe that there's an underpinning reason why. I really think it has to do with wanting people to resign so that it looks better on the organization that they didn't lay off staff. I could be wrong. I don't have the data, but as an HR professional and doing this for several years, that's what it looks like to me. But I'd love to know, what do you think about, this message in the last 6 months of organizations wanting to bring their whole workforce back either on a hybrid or fully in office? Like, how do you think SafeSpace would be able to help navigate that, especially since the first point of contact with SafeSpace is the employee?
I'm like you. I believe that a lot of this has to do with wanting people to quit, right? So let's put that aside. So then you don't have to pay severance and it's the cheapskate route, right? I think there are a couple other things at play. One, I think that there's a control factor at play. There's a commercial real estate factor at play, right? This is all one big cozy system. What's bigger than that, though, and this was something that kind of blew my mind as I moved up the ladder, most companies don't work based on outcomes-based leadership, meaning they don't necessarily have a vision that cascades into a strategy, that cascades into an action plan in any given year. Because when you run a company with outcomes-based leadership, nobody questions what they're supposed to do when they come to work every morning, right? They know exactly what the mission is, how that cascades down to every individual role, from a receptionist all the way up to the CEO. And it was interesting when I ran, and it was before COVID, when I ran the 3 companies I ran, we were remote workforces. And the only reason it worked was because I did outcomes-based leadership. I didn't have people punching time clocks. I didn't have people, because they're knowledge workers at the end of the day, right? So I think that's a big piece of it. I think, though, what I love about SafeSpace is, and I wish I would have had back in the day, is to be able to do some segmentation of different types of employees based on their engagement levels, right? Based on, what are some of the pain points for them? What are some of the things they're trying to navigate? Anastasia brought it up, caregivers, right? Caregiver fatigue is a real thing. So if we have an ability to relieve some of that, make people happier, make them more content and fulfilled through remote work, why wouldn't we do that? As long as they're hitting their outcomes. So I think there's, once again, an insight. There's an insight and an accountability piece that makes a lot of sense to me with the SafeSpace platform.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, SafeSpace just has the opportunity to really be that, again, that valuable tool for companies as they're navigating the complexities of hybrid teams, and also remote team work, right? And I think one critical one I'll call out, is just the ability to foster inclusion and equity within teams, right? So equalizing voices, right? Making sure all voices are heard. And sometimes in hybrid work, unintentionally, right? In office, employees can get more exposure to leadership, right? As we think about leadership development, performance development, right? So I think SafeSpace has an opportunity to ensure that all employees, whether they're remote, whether they're on site, have an equal opportunity to share their perspective and experiences, right? Which could in turn lead to overall policy changes as we think about leadership development, coaching, and things that could, positively affect their careers within the organization.
Yeah. Something that's coming to mind is my work with this tech corporation last couple of years, and the things that they kept saying is, I mean, they were remote anyways because they're a global workforce, and they already knew, when the pandemic happened, that these issues were going to increase because they had been a global remote workforce. So, for example, one of the things is all the different communication channels, whether it's like Teams chat or Slack, and people relax after a little bit and forget that everybody is still included in the thread. And so, you would have a meeting, and then you continue the friendly banter or the off-color jokes, in the chat afterward, not realizing everybody who attended is reading this, right? And so, so they knew these kinds of things were going to happen, and so early on, they had like pretty clear guidelines and agreements about like appropriate ways to use these kinds of spaces. Whereas a lot of other companies, I mean, they just got caught flat-foot, right? It's like, what is happening, and why are there meetings before meetings and meetings after meetings, and why are people chatting while we're Zooming each other, and just a whole slew of issues where people were just caught unaware that this is what happens to humans, right? And I work in a lot of schools, and I support education professionals, and teachers had no clue, right? Because in a lot of cases, students have a lot more experience and expertise, and they learn quickly how to use technology. And so teachers, just couldn't stay up to date with the amount of interaction that could happen. And so they were also getting reports of, bullying, or, just the sense I got overall was we don't have any control, right? Just this complete loss of control when the workforce went remote. And I think a part of what you're saying, Patricia, and you too, Denise, like there's something about trust, and maybe also leaders wanting control again. At least that's how a lot of the employees who got called, back into office perceived it, right? Like it's like a power play. Like, oh well, you're making us come back to work 2 days a week because you can, even though there's no real reason for it, and we've really good cases, and what about the people who moved away? And people just didn't trust the leadership's intention around this callback to the office. And I think that's a really important issue. And those are the places where SafeSpace can, provide opportunities for those types of discussions to happen early, right? Like before leaders make that decision, let's talk about it. What would it mean? Let's do more of a participatory process, maybe, or really listen to the employees' reasons for not wanting to come back, for example. And that could make a real difference. And maybe, as leadership, you still make the same decision, but after you have listened to your people, the decision is perceived differently.
Really great insights. That's one of the reasons why I really like I like all of the features in SafeSpace, but particularly what we were just talking about, because I can see a lot of people going in and asking either the chat or it escalating to a case manager, but I can see a lot of the people asking, about certain policies because they've received a memo that is demanding that they come back, or they work in a hybrid situation and they have moved out of town. When I was chief human resources officer for a firm in New York City, we were already prepared. We already had the workforce working from home at least twice a week. And so when COVID hit, the decision that we made was, yes, we have to go full hybrid. But in coming back, they were influenced by, hey, it's $1 million. It costs $1 million, like Denise was saying, because of, real estate fees that we need to pay. Or, maybe there's a certain percentage of employees that are not engaging the way that they should be engaging. What I like that SafeSpace does is it will help HR to be proactive in understanding what the sentiment is to a message like that. Like you said, EE, you need to understand what's going on with the workforce before, as a leader or leadership, you decide, you make the decision to have the entire workforce come back into the office. And so to continue on that, what advice would you give leadership in ensuring that they understand that, people are going to freak out when they get messages where they don't feel that they were included? They're going to freak out because they've already made decisions for their family and they have included work in those decisions. But when the employer doesn't include them in those decisions, then it gets all wonky. I had a gentleman who moved to upstate New York, and the organization wanted him to come back to work 3 days a week. He made a decision to still be a good employee and still work remotely full time and was still producing. But then the organization made a decision that didn't include him. So what advice would you give to leadership on ensuring that they can help their workforce understand that you still are in a safe space to work and produce and help the company with its goal and its mission and its revenue?
Just tell people, I mean, and this is often what I tell my coaching clients: in the absence of data, people will make up stories, right? So if people don't know clearly why you made that decision to call them back into the office, they're going to fill in with stories of mistrust and distrust, right? It's like, they don't trust us, and they just want to do a power play. Whatever that story is, that's going to become the story, and it's going to build resentment. And so as a leader, you have to be proactive and communicate very clearly and involve people early on in those kinds of decisions.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off that point as well, because that's a really critical point as I think about just building that people first culture, right? Which includes, right, the understanding how to include your employees in the purpose, in, again, why we're making the decisions we're making, right? At the center of those leadership efforts, right? Making sure you're communicating and being transparent. And leaders who really prioritize their team's well-being and creating those opportunities for that, we know that innovation and teams who experience that are well positioned to drive transformational change. So I think creating that people first culture is going to be really important. And there's going to be a lot of additional cushions around what that looks like to support employees, right, as you're going through that change. Because sometimes that people first culture, some pieces of it may be there, or some companies, they're more mature in that piece, but depending on where the company is, making sure they embed that people first culture mindset is going to be so important as we think about transparency and all the things you talked about, E.
I would also add to that, you bring up, Anastasia, transformation, right? And really change management, it happens all the time. It's funny. It's not like a destination or a blip in time. And I think it is so important to understand that the most important part of any change management program is communication. And it's got to be uber transparent, and it's got to be two-way. So it's got to be soliciting feedback. And that means with a platform like SafeSpace, where you're checking sentiment all the time. It's town halls with the CEO. It's the CEO and some of the leadership folks telling you, here's the context for why we're thinking we should bring people back to work at least 2 days a week, right? If you give people context, if you give people insight as to what led you here, and then you have to repeat it almost like a broken record over and over and over again. So as EE said, that message doesn't get contorted, because that's human, right? That's the old telephone game. I think you have a better chance of creating buy-in, right? Or even if you don't get buy-in holistically to what you originally thought you were going to do, maybe you take it and you iterate on your original plan and you make it better and more fitting for the workforce. So I think it requires a little bit of an ego push down, when you're in senior leadership, but it also requires nonstop communication.
Thank you so much. We are at 32 minutes. So what I think we should do is do our intro one more time. And then after we do our intros, Anastasia, you'll do your intro, and then you'll say a little blurb that you would want to be like a miniature commercial for Cypher Tech, and same thing with everyone else.
I'm Anastasia Talton. I am a HR practitioner. I've been in HR for around 20 years now. As we think about the candidate experience and then also employee experience. These days, I've served as head of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging for companies, and really helping them navigate the complexities of transformational change and how we create the right organizational culture and environment for business outcomes and transformational change. I would love to see Cypher Tech continue to grow and be that platform for employees, right? As we think about going into employee sentiment, employee experience, I think there's a huge opportunity to understand how employees are feeling and creating the right strategies and interventions for improvements for organizations.
My name is Denise Conroy. I am an executive coach these days. Before becoming an executive coach, I had a 30-year career in corporate America. I was the CMO at HGTV, and then I was a CEO for private equity-backed portfolio companies for about a decade. What I would like to see for Cypher Tech is really it becoming the platform, the backbone for terrific employee cultures that are cohesive and engaged.
I'm EE Samai. I run a culture design and leadership development company. Something that I would love to see Cypher Tech continue to be is that voice of innovation that's saying we can do this differently. We can have data security and privacy and chat and like all these features that are needed, and maybe some features that we haven't even thought of yet. The workforce is changing so rapidly, the globalization of it, the generational differences in the new workers who are coming in, so much change is happening so rapidly, and leaders need a way to figure out what's happening in their companies. And I think Cypher Tech is positioned so perfectly, right, to be that communication hub between um, the people who are seeing the problems really close, they're who are living the problems, and then the leadership who has the authority to make some changes happen.
I want to thank you so much for your time and your expertise. I feel that I have learned a lot. A lot of things were like pum 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 in my brain as you were speaking. I love the fact that we're all on the same page. We understand, and not only do we understand, but we actually know how to help an organization be one of the best in show if they follow certain steps. And I really believe a product like SafeSpace would be, uh, they would be fortunate to have something so all encompassing for their organization, whether it's a small organization that has 200 people or an organization that has 2,000 people. Just having SafeSpace as a third party neutral organization to help with psychological safety, to help with data, help with whistleblowing, help with discrimination claims, or just answering a simple question that's in the handbook that they just don't want to turn to HR. I think it's a great tool. And I'm so happy that all of you are on board as board advisory members to help Danish with his destination into making this a product for all organizations. So thank you so much. It was great spending time with you today.
Same, same.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on SafeSpace with Patricia Wortham. To learn more about how SafeSpace can transform your workplace culture, visit makesafe.space. Until next time, remember that a supportive and inclusive workplace starts with listening and understanding.